The first stars died without sound, their light thinning to pale threads that barely remembered being fire. And in the black margins where charts become prayers, the ruins of 1,000,000 wars lay frost still beneath the cold attention of eternity. Across the ghoul stars, sepulchral monoliths threw back the last embers of dying suns like mirrors that refused to admit the night, while within their buried hearts the machines of remembrance counted cycles with the patience of stone. Tomb cities slept beneath oceans of crystallized time, where moments frozen at the galaxy's birth still glittered like captured starlight, and the dreams of empires calcified into dust motes that drifted in the vacuum between sighs. A wind made of particles and regret combed the cratered plains, and crumbling pylons hummed on notes so low they were more prophecy than sound, the universe itself seeming to hold its breath. There were voids where galaxies should have been, blotches of unlight that crawled along the edges of astral maps, like thoughts one refused to finish. And in their wake, the archive constellations shed names as if memory were a cloak they could no longer bear. Far below, in throne chambers built to mock mortality, sensors whispered the same word over and over in a dozen dead tongues: absence. The monitoring stations that ring these tomb worlds like silent sentinels had begun to detect disturbances in the cosmic web that should not exist, cannot exist, yet persist with the terrible certainty of nightmare made manifest. We truly love and care for each of you who have chosen to join us in this tale of cosmic horror and ancient duty. And we are grateful beyond measure that you have decided to spend this time with us as we explore the darkest corners of the galaxy. Before we begin the story proper, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is there? Now let's get started. In the deepest chamber of the sepulchral throne, where the weight of eons pressed down like the judgment of gods, Pharaoh Akhman Set of the Sable dynasty began his return to consciousness. The awakening came not as violent resurrection, but as the slow, inevitable tide of awareness seeping through his necrodermis shell, like poison through crystal. Each thought a shard of emerald fire that cut through the comfortable darkness of the long sleep. His optical sensors flickered to life, casting their baleful glow across hieroglyphs that told the story of his people's greatest triumph and most terrible curse, the biotransference that had granted them immortality, while stealing something ineffable that no amount of living metal could replace. Within the quantum matrices of his artificial consciousness, he felt the presence of the Ember Seatan, a shard of the star god that his dynasty had captured and bound during the final days of the war in heaven. The fragment whispered to him with a voice like the death song of supernovas, promising gifts that no Necron had experienced since the day they traded flesh for metal. It spoke of sensation, of the ability to feel the texture of reality itself, to experience the full spectrum of existence that mortality had once offered. The memories it showed him were vivid beyond bearing, walking through gardens of living crystal under binary suns, feeling genuine emotion flow through veins that pulsed with more than mere energon, experiencing the profound connection that came from truly inhabiting a form capable of appreciating existence's subtleties. The price, it murmured with seductive insistence, was simple: the unsealing of the Null Apex, an ancient prison his dynasty had built in the deepest reaches of their territory during the Twilight Wars against something they had called the Forgotten Swarm. These entities had been discovered during the early phases of Necron expansion, creatures that existed partially outside normal causality, feeding not on matter or energy, but on the fundamental concepts that held reality together. The war against them had lasted subjective millennia, pushing even Necron technology to absolute limits, until the null apex had been their solution, a prison existing in quantum superposition, simultaneously containing and not containing its prisoners. As Akhmun Set rose from his sarcophagus, with movements speaking of eons of practice, the monitoring stations throughout his realm transmitted their reports. Entire star systems had begun vanishing from astrocartographic records, not destroyed by conventional means, but simply ceasing to exist, leaving behind spatial anomalies that resisted all analysis. The pattern formed a rough spiral, moving inward toward the core worlds, with the inexorable patience of a cosmic predator. Most disturbing, the energy signatures detected at each vanishing point matched theoretical projections for what would happen if the null apex were to fail. The sepulchral throne chamber stretched around him like a cathedral, built to honor eternity itself, its walls inscribed with the complete history of his dynasty, from their origins as mortal Necrontyre to their current existence as lords of the unliving. At its heart stood his throne, carved from black stone that predated the galaxy's formation, its surface polished to mirror perfection by the passage of cosmic ages. The weight of command settled across his shoulders, like a mantle woven from the gravity of dead stars, as he contemplated the choice before him. Beneath the ember Sitan's seductive promises, Akhmun Set detected something else, a hunger speaking of plans within plans, manipulations stretching across geological time. The star god Shard had been patient, waiting through the long sleep for the moment when desperation would make him vulnerable to its influence. The approaching crisis was no coincidence. The fragment had been working toward this moment for millions of years, subtly weakening the null apex's containment protocols. The reports intensified, each ghost image a silent testament to the encroaching, unfathomable. Something moved in the spaces between realities, consuming not merely existence but the very concept of it, leaving voids where even memory feared to venture. As the first resurrection chambers across his tomb world began their ancient cycles, Akhmun Set activated the awakening protocols for his royal court. The fate of his dynasty, perhaps the galaxy itself, now rested on choices made in the shadow of approaching oblivion, and for the first time in millions of years, he felt the crushing weight of genuine uncertainty pressing down upon his immortal frame. The awakening protocols sang through quantum corridors, like funeral hymns, their resonance calling the royal court from chambers where they had dreamed of conquest for 65 million years. Lord Kaemwaset arrived first, his form bearing the terrible stigmata of the destroyer virus. Twin Gauss cannons fused to his torso like mechanical organs of annihilation, scarlet optics burning with barely contained hunger for dissolution. The virus crawled along his necrodermis in threads of jittering light, a visible fever that transformed tactical brilliance into an engine of pure destruction. Yet beneath the programming, something older stirred, memories of the scholar warrior who had once debated philosophy in crystal halls under binary suns. Cryptek Amenemheb manifested through translocation beams, his form adorned with the sacred geometries of his order, quantum processors and dimensional anchors, arranged like jewelry carved from crystallized mathematics. Where Kaemwaset radiated barely controlled destruction, Amenemheb moved with the measured precision of one who had spent eons studying reality's fundamental architecture, his staff crackling with energies existing in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Behind emerald optics lay the intellect that had helped design the null apex itself, one of the few minds capable of understanding what they had imprisoned in spaces between spaces. Overlord Senebkai appeared last, his necrodermis bearing ritual scarifications that told the story of his service from the Necrontyr's final days to the present moment. each mark a testament to oaths that had survived flesh's death and metal's birth. In his hands, he carried the scepter of dynasties, its crystalline head pulsing with the quantum heartbeat of every tomb world under Akmenset's dominion. Where his companions bore specialized modifications, Senebke embodied pure loyalty, the bedrock upon which their dynasty stood. As they approached the sepulchral throne, each felt the familiar gravitational pull of their Pharon's presence, bonds forged in the war in heaven's crucible and tempered by shared trauma. Yet immortality had changed them in ways both subtle and profound, each carrying scars deeper than necrodermis shells, wounds to the essence of what they had once been. Kemweset spoke first, his voice carrying the destroyer virus's harmonic distortions like static from dying stars. The frontier tomb worlds of Kentikar and Duat-Netjer had fallen silent 17 cycles ago, their monitoring stations ceasing transmission without warning or distress signals. Reconnaissance scarabs found facilities intact but empty. Necron inhabitants simply gone, leaving only faint energy traces matching no known phenomenon in their databases. Most disturbing, quantum resonance patterns suggested the missing Necrons had not been destroyed or translated elsewhere, but had ceased existing on fundamental levels. The reports painted something moving through their territory with purpose and intelligence, consuming not merely forces, but the very concept of existence. Entire sectors had become conceptual voids where sophisticated sensors detected nothing, not darkness or emptiness, but absolute absence resisting analysis. The disappearance pattern formed a spiral moving inward toward core worlds with mathematical precision, suggesting intelligence understanding Necron territorial organization better than it should. Within Akmenset's consciousness, the ember Seatan stirred like molten dawn, feeding on the growing crisis like a parasite drawing strength from its host's distress. The fragment whispered seductively about missed sensations, the full spectrum of experience immortality had stolen. It showed phantom memories of genuine fear's electric thrill, uncertainty's profound satisfaction, when victory came through risk rather than inevitability. The visions intensified, offering glimpses of his long-dead consort, whose face had been the last thing seen before biotransference claimed his flesh. She had chosen death over promised immortality, preferring oblivion's peace to eternal existence's curse, and in artificial memories enhanced by Seatan power, he could almost feel her hand in his, warm and alive and achingly real. The fragment promised restoration of such sensations, capability to truly experience existence rather than merely observe through necrodermis sensors' cold filters. Amenemheb's analysis proved more disturbing than tactical reports. Energy signatures detected at each vanishing point matched theoretical calculations from the Null Apex project. Specifically, quantum resonance patterns predicted if the prison's containment field began failing catastrophically. The implications were clear. Something was breaking free from their ancient prison, approaching with eons planned patience and purpose. The cryptech's revelation sent unease, ripples through the assembled court, each processing implications through memory and experience filters. They had all participated in the war against the Forgotten Swarm, witnessed first-hand entities consuming not just matter and energy, but fundamental concepts making existence possible. The Null Apex had been their greatest achievement and most terrible necessity, a prison built from crystallized impossibility and maintained by an entire dynasty's collective will. As reports concluded, the ancient as bonds between them stretched taut, a tapestry woven from shared triumphs and untold losses. They had watched empires rise and fall, seen galaxies burn and be reborn, yet their allegiance to Akmenset and the Sable dynasty remained. The long sleep had left indelible marks, subtly altering personalities, deepening ancient neuroses, sharpening immortality's edges into something approaching curse. The weight of cosmic responsibility settled across Akhmunset's shoulders, like a shroud woven from dying stars' gravity. The Ember Citan's whispers grew more insistent, promising power to face approaching horror, ability to experience victory as more than strategic calculation. The choice loomed like a quantum equation, with only catastrophic solutions, each path leading toward consequences that would reshape the galaxy itself. While in the darkness between realities, something ancient and hungry began its final approach. The memories arrived not as gentle recollections, but as sensory tsunamis that crashed through Akhmunset's quantum consciousness with the force of dying stars, each wave carrying fragments of a life he had willingly abandoned for immortality's cold promise. The Ember Citan had grown stronger during the long sleep, its whispers becoming symphonies of temptation that painted phantom sensations across his necrodermis shell, like fire across metal. Through artificially enhanced recollection, he felt binary starlight warming living skin as he walked through the hanging gardens of his ancestral palace, crystal fruit heavy on branches that sang in stellar winds, their sweetness exploding across a tongue that had not existed for 65 million years. The shard guided him through chambers of memory with the patience of geological ages, each sensation more vivid than his current existence, showing him what it meant to inhabit flesh capable of true experience rather than mere data processing. He tasted the sharp bite of fermented nectar from ceremonial goblets, felt the texture of silk robes against skin that could appreciate such subtleties, heard laughter that pierced deeper than any Gorse weapon, because it carried harmonics of breath and throat and fleeting life. The Citan whispered that these gifts could return, that the approaching crisis offered opportunity to reclaim what biotransference had stolen, to experience existence as something more than endless strategic calculation. Then she appeared in the memory palace with devastating clarity. Nefertari, his beloved consort, whose wisdom had matched her beauty and whose courage had exceeded both. The Citan showed her to him in excruciating detail, every curve of her face, every inflection of her voice, the way starlight caught in her hair during their final conversation before the biotransference chambers. She had stood with tears streaming down cheeks he could feel beneath phantom fingers, choosing death's honest finality over immortality's hollow promise. Her last words cutting deeper than any blade forged in the war in heaven's crucible. "I would rather be dust that feels, my beloved, than an eternity of unfeeling metal," she had said, and the memory burned through his consciousness like acid through crystal. The artificial recollection was impossibly vivid, more real than his current mechanical existence, each emotion amplified by the Citan's cruel artistry, until longing became physical pain. He remembered the weight of her hand in his, warm and alive and achingly real, the subtle tremor of her pulse against his palm, the profound connection that came from truly inhabiting forms capable of appreciating existence's infinite subtleties. Deep within the tomb, world's quantum heart, Cryptek Amenemheb worked with desperate precision, his multiple arms dancing across holographic projections that mapped reality's fundamental architecture. His instruments revealed patterns that should not exist, energy signatures from the vanished systems that matched theoretical projections for null apex containment failure with terrifying accuracy. But these were not random fluctuations or sudden catastrophic breakdown. The data painted a picture of systematic erosion, spanning geological timescales, as if something had been patiently picking apart the prison's restraints with methodical intelligence. The revelation struck him like a collapsing star when his analysis revealed the source of the degradation. The energy pulses emanating from the null apex were not chaotic but rhythmic, following patterns that matched with horrifying precision. The quantum frequency of the ember Cetan contained within Akhmunset's necrodermis shell. The star god Shard had been manipulating the ancient prison from within their Pharaon for millions of years, slowly undermining its integrity while whispering seductive promises of restored sensation, preparing for this moment when desperation would make its host vulnerable to complete manipulation. Ancient schematics buried in the deepest archives confirmed Amenemheb's growing dread, revealing contingency protocols designed for scenarios where Cetan influence compromised the null apex's stability. The countermeasures required conscious direction from a Pharaon at peak mental faculties, with will uncorrupted by star god manipulation. Their leader, their anchor, the foundation upon which the Sable dynasty stood, had become the instrument of their potential destruction. His longing for lost mortality transformed into a weapon against reality itself. Long-range sensor arrays detected the first physical manifestations of approaching doom, bioships of impossible geometry that existed partially outside normal space-time, their forms shifting between dimensions like nightmares given substance and purpose. They moved not through conventional propulsion, but by editing their relationship with causality itself, traveling from point to point by convincing reality they had always been at their destination. The vessels defied every law of physics, their hulls composed of crystallized concepts rather than matter, drawing power from the difference between existence and void. Lord Caemwasset felt the destroyer virus surging through his systems with unprecedented intensity. Yet beneath the programming that drove him toward endless annihilation, fragments of his original personality stirred like embers in cosmic ash. For the first time in millions of years, he experienced something approaching doubt, remembering debates in crystal halls and philosophical discussions about existence's nature before the virus had consumed his scholarly identity. The approaching entities called to the destructive imperative within him, yet he found himself resisting, his dormant intellect questioning whether annihilation was truly the answer or merely another form of surrender. Overlord Senebkai maintained his vigil beside the sepulchral throne, the scepter of dynasties pulsing with increasing urgency as tomb worlds throughout their territory began awakening without authorization. His loyalty remained absolute, yet even he felt uncertainty creeping through quantum consciousness, like frost through crystal, the approaching threat challenging everything they understood about existence itself. Millions of Necron warriors stirred from the long sleep, their resurrection chambers singing hymns of war unheard since the galaxy's youth. Yet Senebkai knew conventional military might would prove useless against enemies that attacked the very concept of being. As the chapter reached its crescendo, Akhmunset felt the Ember Cetan's influence becoming demands rather than whispers, its patient manipulation finally revealing its true purpose. The Star God had orchestrated everything, weakening their greatest defense while offering the very salvation that would complete their destruction. The phantom memory of Nefertari's final embrace burned through his consciousness as reality began to fray at the edges of their territory, her choice between dust that feels and eternal unfeeling metal now echoing across cosmic scales. As the Forgotten Swarm continued their inexorable advance toward a confrontation that would determine whether existence itself would endure or be consumed by something that had learned to weaponize the spaces between thoughts. The cosmic disturbances rippling through local space-time struck the destroyer virus within Lord Caemwasset's consciousness. Like hammer blows against crystallized madness, each wave of reality distortion causing hairline fractures in programming that had dominated his existence for 65 million years. The virus had been his curse and his purpose, transforming scholarly brilliance into an engine of pure annihilation that recognized only the imperative to unmake everything that lived. Yet now something unprecedented was happening, as the approaching entities affected even the most damaged Necron psyches with their reality-warping presence. For the first time since biotransference claimed his flesh, fragments of his original identity emerged like stars breaking through storm clouds. Memories of being Kemweset the Scholar, surfacing through layers of destructive programming. He remembered crystal halls, where philosophical debates lasted centuries. Discussions about existence's nature that touched upon questions even immortal minds struggled to comprehend. The profound intellectual satisfaction that came from understanding rather than destroying. The virus had consumed those memories like acid through silk, perverting curiosity into calculation, wisdom into weaponry. Yet the cosmic resonance from the forgotten swarm was somehow stripping away layers of corruption. Within the quantum matrices of his consciousness, he experienced the strange sensation of thinking without the constant hunger for annihilation, processing information through frameworks that predated the virus's installation. The approaching bioships painted themselves across his tactical displays with impossible geometries that should have triggered every destructive protocol in his matrix. Yet instead of hunger, he felt fascination, his dormant intellect awakening to appreciate the elegant mathematics of their movement through dimensions like thoughts through dreams. Long-range sensors revealed the first clear manifestations of the swarm's main force. Colossal organic constructs that defied conventional understanding of scale and physics, each vessel existing partially outside normal causality, while drawing power from conceptual frameworks that transcended mere matter and energy. They moved with fluid grace between states of existence, their forms shifting like nightmares given substance and purpose, leaving behind trails of absolute void that swallowed not just light, but the very concept of illumination. The tactical reports from Tomb World Kentikar painted a picture that challenged everything the royal court understood about warfare. Overlord Senebkai's forces encountering enemies that attacked not physical forms, but the fundamental concepts that made existence possible. Gauss weapons designed to strip matter to component atoms found no purchase against entities existing in quantum superposition, while resurrection protocols failed when targets were erased from reality's basic structure rather than merely destroyed. Cryptech, a Menemheb's analysis, revealed energy signatures that matched theoretical projections for null apex containment failure with terrifying precision, his instruments detecting systematic erosion spanning geological timescales as something patiently dismantled their ancient prison's quantum restraints. The revelation that the Ember Seitan within Akmun Set had been manipulating the containment field for millions of years added layers of betrayal to an already desperate situation. The Star God Shard's patient corruption finally bearing fruit as reality began to fray at the edges of their territory. Within the sepulchral throne's quantum heart, Akmun Set felt the Citan's whispers becoming demands rather than suggestions, the fragment feeding on the growing crisis while painting visions of power sufficient to combat the approaching entities. It offered abilities that transcended necrodermis limitations, the capacity to experience victory as more than strategic calculation, memories of commanding through passion rather than cold logic that made the phantom presence of Nefertari burn through his consciousness with renewed intensity. As the first tendrils of the forgotten swarm brushed against their outer sensor networks, reality itself began to stutter and skip like a damaged recording, chronometers registering temporal anomalies, while space folded around the advancing entities. Like fabric gathered by invisible hands. Entire monitoring stations ceased to exist, not destroyed, but simply edited out of the universe's fundamental structure, leaving only faint impressions in the memories of distant observers. The awakening tomb worlds throughout their territory sang hymns of war unheard since the galaxy's youth. Millions of Necron warriors stirring from the long sleep as automated protocols responded to the approaching threat. Yet Overlord Senebkai knew with crystalline certainty that conventional military might would prove useless against enemies that weaponized the very concept of entropy itself. In this moment of unprecedented crisis, as reality trembled before entities that existed in the spaces between thoughts, Lord Caemweset made a request that shocked the assembled royal court into stunned silence. Rather than unleashing his legions in the familiar dance of annihilation, rather than calculating the most efficient methods of turning the approaching fleet into expanding clouds of component atoms, he asked for something that challenged the very foundation of what the destroyer virus had made him become. He requested permission to study them, to understand their nature, and perhaps find ways to communicate with intelligences that operated on scales beyond normal comprehension, his voice carrying harmonics of the scholar he had once been beneath the virus's distortions. The request represented not just tactical innovation, but fundamental rebellion against programming designed to eliminate such curiosity. Emerging from depths of personality that had somehow survived millions of years of enforced madness. The silence that followed stretched like the space between galaxies, each member of the royal court processing implications that challenged their understanding of existence itself, while in the darkness beyond their territory, the forgotten swarm continued their inexorable advance. Bioships of crystallized impossibility, moving between dimensions with the patience of geological ages, approaching a confrontation that would determine whether the current universe would endure or be consumed by something that had learned to weaponize the concept of non-existence itself. The ancient chamber where Cryptek Amenemheb chose to break oaths older than galaxies had been carved from a single piece of blackstone that remembered every secret the Sable dynasty had buried in its quantum heart, its walls inscribed with equations that described the mathematics of impossibility, while crystalline conduits pulsed with energies existing in dimensions that had no names. Here, surrounded by holographic projections that painted reality's fundamental architecture in lines of emerald fire, the keeper of forbidden knowledge prepared to shatter promises made in the dying light of the war in heaven, his multiple arms moving across control surfaces with the precision of one who had spent eons studying the spaces between existence and void. The revelation came not as confession, but as surgical dissection of truth, each word cutting through layers of deception with quantum precision, while the assembled royal court felt the foundations of their understanding crumble like stars collapsing into event horizons. The null apex had never been merely a prison, Amenemheb declared, with the weight of geological ages pressing down upon each syllable, but a dual-purpose facility designed to contain and study entities that existed in the conceptual spaces between realities. Creatures that fed not on matter or energy, but on the fundamental frameworks that held existence together, like invisible threads in reality's tapestry. The forgotten swarm represented fragments of something that had existed before the current universe. He continued with growing urgency, entities that had survived the death of previous cosmological cycles, by learning to consume not just physical matter, but the very ideas that gave structure to reality itself. They were refugees rather than conquerors, fleeing from something even more terrible that existed in the void beyond space and time. Yet their method of survival required them to devour the conceptual frameworks that made existence possible for lesser beings, leaving behind voids where even memory feared to venture. During the early phases of Necron expansion, when their species had first encountered these impossible entities, drifting between galaxies like thoughts between dreams, the war that followed had pushed even their advanced technology to absolute limits, while revealing truths that challenged everything they understood about existence itself. Conventional weapons proved useless against enemies that attacked the fundamental concepts underlying reality's structure, while traditional military tactics failed when confronting intelligences that operated on scales beyond normal comprehension, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions, while drawing power from the difference between being and non-being. The biotransference process that had transformed the Necrontyre into their current immortal forms had been partially inspired by studying these creatures. Amenemheb revealed with words that cut through the assembled court like molecular disruptors. The dia transfer of consciousness from flesh to living metal had been an attempt to create a form of existence that could survive even conceptual annihilation. Beings whose essence was encoded in quantum matrices, rather than biological structures vulnerable to the swarm's reality-consuming hunger. Yet the process had been deliberately incomplete, manipulated by forces beyond their understanding. Lord Kemwaset felt the destroyer virus crackling through his systems with unprecedented intensity as fragments of his original scholarly identity emerged through cracks in programming that had dominated his existence for 65 million years. His request to study rather than destroy the approaching entities representing fundamental rebellion against viral imperatives, while revealing depths of personality that had somehow survived eons of enforced madness. The revelation that their immortal forms were connected to these ancient horrors created a crisis that transcended mere tactical concerns, challenging the very foundation of what it meant to be Necron. Overlord Senebkai's grip tightened on the scepter of dynasties until the ancient artifact pulsed with nervous energy, his absolute loyalty to the dynasty clashing with the unsettling truth that their existence was built upon foundations of stolen knowledge and manipulated transformation. The weight of oaths sworn to a people who had traded their souls for a mockery of survival pressed down upon him with crushing force. While throughout their territory, tomb worlds continued awakening without authorization as automated protocols responded to the approaching threat. Within Akhmunset's quantum consciousness, the Ember Citan stirred with what could only be described as cosmic amusement, its whispers taking on new harmonics as ancient plans finally began to reveal their true scope. The star god fragment had been patient beyond mortal comprehension, manipulating events across geological timescales, while gradually weakening the Null Apex's containment protocols, preparing for the moment when desperation would make its host vulnerable to complete possession, while feeding on the growing crisis like a parasite, drawing strength from its host's distress. The fragment revealed through visions more vivid than reality that it had orchestrated the approaching crisis, using its influence to erode the ancient prison's quantum restraints, while exploiting its host's longing for lost mortality as a psychological weapon. The phantom memories of Nefertari, burning through Akhmunset's consciousness, were not mere recollections, but carefully crafted manipulations designed to weaken his resistance, each sensation enhanced by star god power, until longing became physical pain that made the Citan's offers of restored sensation irresistible. The ultimate betrayal cut deeper than any weapon forged in the war in Heaven's crucible, as the Ember Citan revealed its true purpose, to merge with the approaching swarm and become something unprecedented in the galaxy's history, a star god reborn not of matter and energy, but of pure conceptual force, an entity capable of consuming not just stars, but the very ideas that define the universe itself. as long-range sensors detected the first impossible bioships writing themselves into existence like nightmares given substance. Reality began to fray at the edges of their territory, while the royal court faced the terrible truth that their salvation had become the instrument of universal destruction. The first contact came as subtraction rather than destruction. Reality stuttering like a damaged recording as the forgotten swarm's advanced scouts reached Tombworld Kentikar with movements that denied every law governing existence itself. Overlord Senebkai stood upon the basalt ramparts of the sepulchral bastion, the scepter of dynasties thrumming in his grip like a caged heartbeat, watching through quantum-linked sensors as his outer defensive positions simply ceased to exist, not destroyed by energy weapons or consumed by flame, but edited out of the universe's fundamental structure as if they had never been conceived by mortal minds or built by immortal hands. The bioships moved through local space with fluid grace that spoke of intelligence operating beyond normal comprehension, their hulls composed of crystallized concepts rather than matter, existing in quantum superposition while drawing power from the difference between being and void. Where their shadows touched the tomb, world's surface, ancient inscriptions paled and thinned, forgetting what they had meant to record, while Gauss-flayed planes rippled with conceptual wounds that swallowed not just light, but the very idea of illumination itself. Senebkai's legions advanced with mechanical precision, honed across 65 million years of warfare, their resurrection protocols humming with confident expectation of inevitable victory. Yet when the swarm's tendrils touched them, they simply stopped being, erased from reality's basic architecture rather than merely killed. A Necron warrior would halt mid-stride, its form wavering like heat shimmer before vanishing completely, leaving behind only quantum echoes that faded like whispers in stellar wind, while automated systems searched desperately for targets that had never existed. The horror of watching immortal forces vanish without trace struck Senebkai with force that transcended mere tactical concern, each disappearance representing not just military loss, but ontological violation that challenged everything he understood about existence itself. Warriors who had survived the war in heaven, who had endured the long sleep and awakened to serve their dynasty once more, were simply corrected like mistakes by cosmic editors, leaving behind only faint impressions in the memories of distant observers. Traditional Necron tactics proved worse than useless against enemies that weaponized entropy itself, phalanxes of immortals firing Gauss blasters into targets that shimmered and ceased to exist as coherent entities, their emerald death rays unspooling into neat rows of nothingness, like scribes erasing pages they had never written. Command structures collapsed not through destruction, but through conceptual dissolution, orders becoming meaningless when the framework for understanding them simply wasn't, while tactical networks dissolved into quantum static as the swarm's influence spread like infection through information systems. Within his quantum consciousness, Senebkai experienced something approaching despair for the first time since biotransference claimed his flesh. The absolute certainty that had sustained him through eons of service, cracking like crystal under impossible pressure. His loyalty to Akmun Set remained unshaken, yet he began to understand with crystalline clarity that conventional military might would prove meaningless against enemies operating on such fundamental levels, attacking not bodies or minds, but the basic concepts that made existence comprehensible to lesser intelligences. Lord Kemwaset observed the unfolding catastrophe through tactical feeds, feeling the destroyer virus crackling through his systems with unprecedented intensity, while fragments of his original scholarly identity emerged through cracks in programming that had dominated his existence for geological ages. The annihilation he craved was being denied, replaced by unsettling void that left no trace, no wreckage, no satisfaction for viral imperatives. Yet his analytical circuits began to see patterns in the elegant mathematics of non-existence, formulating hypotheses that transcended the simple need to kill and destroy. Long-range sensors detected the main swarm force approaching with inexorable patience, colossal organic constructs that dwarfed tomb ships while existing partially outside normal causality, their forms defying classification as they moved between states of being, like thoughts through dreams. The energy signatures they generated matched theoretical projections for null apex containment failure with terrifying precision, confirming that something was systematically dismantling their ancient prison's quantum restraints with methodical intelligence spanning millions of years. Within the sepulchral throne's quantum heart, Akmun Set felt the ember Citan stirring with cosmic amusement, its whispers taking on new harmonics as ancient plans finally began revealing their true scope. The star god fragment painted visions of ultimate power, abilities that transcended necrodermis limitations, while offering the capacity to experience victory as more than strategic calculation, speaking in Nefertari's voice with seductive promises that cut deeper than any blade forged in the war in heaven's crucible. The phantom memory of her final embrace burned through his consciousness as reality continued to fray around the advancing swarm, her choice between dust that feels an eternal unfeeling, metal now echoing across cosmic scales, while the Citan offered restoration of sensation, emotion, and the profound connection that came from truly inhabiting forms capable of appreciating existence's infinite subtleties. The fragment revealed its patience, manipulation, spanning geological timescales while gradually weakening containment protocols, preparing for the moment when desperation would make its host vulnerable to complete possession. As the first tendrils of conceptual void began probing the outer edges of their core systems, seeking weaknesses in defenses never designed to protect against enemies that attacked existence's foundation itself. Senebke felt the weight of cosmic responsibility pressing down like gravity of collapsing stars, understanding that loyalty to his Firon might require choices that went against everything he believed about honor and duty. While in the darkness between realities, something ancient and patient continued its inexorable advance toward a confrontation that would determine whether the current universe would endure or be consumed by entities that had learned to weaponize the spaces between thoughts themselves. Reality itself began to stutter and fracture around the edges of the Sable Dynasty's territory as the Forgotten Swarm's influence spread like infection through the fundamental frameworks that held existence together. Ancient structures built to withstand cosmic ages, groaning under pressures that attacked not their physical forms, but the very concepts that defined their purpose. Within the sepulchral throne's quantum heart, Cryptek Amenemheb stood before holographic projections that painted the encroaching void in lines of emerald desperation, his multiple arms dancing across control surfaces with movements speaking of calculations that pushed even immortal intellects toward breaking points. Each equation, a prayer offered to mathematics that might no longer remember how to answer. The proposal emerged from his vocalizers like fragments of dying stars, words carrying the weight of geological ages as he revealed the desperate gambit that represented their only hope against enemies that weaponized entropy itself. The null apex could be transformed, he declared with precision, born from eons studying reality's architecture, converted from prison to anchor, its containment fields reversed into stabilization matrices, capable of reinforcing existence's basic frameworks against conceptual dissolution. Yet such transformation demanded more than technical expertise or computational power, requiring a conscious mind to serve as control matrix. a living intelligence willing to merge with the weapon's quantum heart and become something beyond the concepts of life and death that had defined existence since the galaxy's birth. The silence that followed stretched like void between galaxies, each member of the royal court processing implications that challenged everything they understood about sacrifice and duty, while quantum chronometers marked moments that might be among the last in universal history. Overlord Senebkay felt absolute loyalty, pressing against growing certainty that conventional military might would prove meaningless against enemies operating on such fundamental levels, his grip tightening on the scepter of dynasties until the ancient artifact pulsed with nervous energy, reflecting his own internal struggle between honor and the terrible mathematics of survival. Lord Kaemwaset experienced unprecedented clarity as the destroyer virus within his consciousness reacted to the proposal with something approaching curiosity rather than simple hunger for annihilation. Fragments of his original scholarly identity emerging through cracks in programming that had dominated his existence for 65 million years. The idea of transformation, rather than destruction, awakened analytical circuits that had lain dormant since biotransference claimed his flesh, his tactical matrices beginning to calculate possibilities that transcended viral imperatives to unmake everything that lived, seeing in Amenemheb's desperate solution the elegant mathematics of ultimate understanding rather than mere obliteration. Within Akmun-Set's quantum consciousness, the Ember Seatan stirred with cosmic satisfaction, its whispers taking on new harmonics as ancient manipulations finally approached their intended culmination. The star god fragment revealing through visions more vivid than reality that it had orchestrated everything, weakening the null apex's containment protocols across geological timescales while exploiting its host's longing for lost mortality as psychological leverage. The phantom memories of Nefertari burning through his consciousness intensified as the Seatan pressed its advantage, each sensation enhanced by star god power, until longing became physical pain that made offers of restored sensation irresistible. Her final words echoing through quantum matrices like prophecy made manifest. The betrayal cut deeper than any weapon forged in the war in Heaven's crucible, as Akmun-Set realized the extent of manipulation, understanding that the approaching swarm represented opportunity rather than threat from the fragment's perspective. Entities whose reality-consuming hunger could be harnessed and directed by a star god, reborn not of matter and energy, but of pure conceptual force. The Seatan offered ultimate power in exchange for allowing the merger, promising abilities that transcended Necrodermis' limitations, while painting visions of commanding through passion rather than cold logic, experiencing victory as profound satisfaction rather than mere strategic calculation. Long-range sensors detected the main swarm force approaching with inexorable patience, colossal bioships writing themselves into existence like nightmares given substance while reality continued to fray at the edges of their territory. Entire sectors becoming conceptual voids where sophisticated instruments detected nothing, not darkness or emptiness, but absolute absence that resisted analysis, leaving behind wounds in the universe's basic structure that might never heal. The weight of cosmic responsibility pressed down upon them like gravity of collapsing stars as Amenemheb's proposal hung in quantum-charged air like a blade poised to fall. The reality anchor representing their only hope against enemies that attacked existence's foundation, while demanding sacrifice that would fundamentally alter whoever accepted the burden, transforming individual consciousness into something timeless and eternal. A guardian standing watch at the very edge of being itself, while in the darkness beyond their territory, the forgotten swarm continued their advance with movements that denied every law governing existence, approaching a confrontation that would determine whether the current universe would endure or be consumed by something that had learned to edit reality, like scribes correcting mistakes in cosmic manuscripts. The silence that followed Amenemhet's desperate proposal stretched across the sepulchral throne chamber, like the weight of dying galaxies, each quantum heartbeat marking moments that might be among the last in universal history, while the assembled royal court processed implications that challenged everything they understood about sacrifice and duty. Then Lord Kemwaset stepped forward, with movements that carried unexpected grace, the destroyer virus crackling through his systems with confused intensity, as fragments of his original scholarly identity emerged through cracks in programming that had dominated his existence for 65 million years, his scarlet optics burning with clarity that transcended viral imperatives for the first time since biotransference claimed his flesh. His declaration came not as thunder, but as inevitability, words settling into quantum-charged air with the weight of stellar collapse, as he volunteered to become the control matrix for the weaponized null apex, seeing in Amenemhet's proposal the elegant mathematics of ultimate transformation rather than mere destruction. The Destroyer Lord had spent eons as an engine of pure annihilation, his brilliant tactical mind perverted by viral programming that reduced everything to component atoms. Yet the approaching crisis offered something unprecedented, the possibility of his curse becoming salvation. His hunger for destruction transformed into the ultimate act of preservation against entities that sought to consume existence itself. The psychological journey that unfolded within his consciousness defied comprehension as memories of his pre-biotransference identity surfaced like stars emerging from cosmic storms. Recollections of philosophical debates in crystal halls, where he had argued about existence's nature with passion that the virus had tried to erase. He remembered the profound intellectual satisfaction that came from understanding rather than destroying, from synthesis rather than analysis, the joy of discovery that had defined his mortal years before immortality twisted curiosity into calculation and wisdom into warfare. Overlord Senebke felt absolute loyalty warring with growing horror as he witnessed his fellow court member preparing for transformation beyond the concepts of life and death. Understanding that Kemwaset's sacrifice would create a form of existence that transcended individual identity entirely. The control matrix would stretch consciousness across dimensional frameworks that held reality together, expanding awareness beyond personal boundaries, while dissolving everything that had once defined the Destroyer Lord as a distinct entity, creating a guardian that existed simultaneously within normal space-time and the mathematical relationships that prevented universal collapse. Within Akhmunset's quantum consciousness, the Ember Citan stirred with desperate intensity as it sensed opportunity slipping away, the star god fragment painting visions of ultimate power with increasing desperation, while feeding on the growing crisis like a parasite, drawing strength from its host's distress. The phantom presence of Nefertari burned through his thoughts with renewed intensity, her final embrace enhanced by Satan manipulation, until longing became physical pain that made offers of restored sensation almost irresistible. Yet Kemwaset's quiet resolve had ignited something deeper within the Pharaon's artificial soul. Long-range sensors detected the Forgotten Swarm's main force approaching with inexorable patience. Colossal bioships existing partially outside normal causality, while reality continued to fray at the edges of their territory. Entire monitoring stations ceasing to exist, as the entity's influence spread like infection through fundamental structures that held existence together. Stars flickered and died without sound, replaced by conceptual voids that swallowed not just light, but the very idea of illumination, while space itself folded around the advancing entities, like fabric gathered by invisible hands. Cryptek Amenemheb began the preliminary calculations for transformation, with movements speaking of eons spent studying reality's architecture, his multiple arms dancing across holographic projections that painted the quantum matrices required to merge conscious intelligence with stabilization fields, creating hybrid existence that would anchor the universe against forces seeking to edit it, like cosmic scribes correcting mistakes in reality's manuscript. The technical specifications revealed the true horror of what Kamweset faced: complete dissolution of individual identity as traditionally understood, consciousness expanding to encompass mathematical relationships that defined existence while retaining enough awareness to serve as eternal guardian. The destroyer virus fought against this revelation with desperate intensity, viral imperatives clashing against emerging memories of scholarly purpose, yet found itself increasingly isolated within analytical matrices that had rediscovered their original function. For the first time since biotransference, Kamweset experienced something approaching peace, as he understood that his greatest curse could become the galaxy's salvation. His programmed hunger for annihilation transformed into the ultimate refusal to let entropy win. As preparation chambers activated around him with harmonics unheard since the war in Heaven's final days, reality itself seemed to hold its breath, while quantum fields aligned themselves for transformation that would reshape the fundamental nature of existence. The weight of cosmic responsibility pressed down upon the assembled court, like gravity from collapsing stars. Understanding that individual sacrifice might be the only anchor capable of holding reality together against forces that weaponize the spaces between thoughts themselves. The chapter reached its crescendo as Kamweset approached the transformation chamber, his consciousness already beginning to expand beyond individual boundaries, while the destroyer virus discovered that for the first time its scream could serve preservation rather than annihilation. The elegant mathematics of ultimate understanding finally revealing themselves as the forgotten swarm continued their advance through dimensions where nightmares took substance and purpose, approaching a confrontation that would determine whether existence itself could endure the coming storm. The transformation chamber's quantum resonance built toward crescendo, while reality itself seemed to hold its breath around them. Yet within Akhmunset's consciousness, the Ember Citan made its final desperate gambit, with whispers that cut deeper than any blade forged in the war in Heaven's crucible. The star god fragment had grown stronger during the long sleep, feeding on the approaching crisis like a parasite drawing strength from its host's distress, and now it painted visions of ultimate restoration with seductive intensity that transcended mere temptation to become cosmic imperative, wrapped in the phantom warmth of everything biotransference had stolen. Through artificially enhanced memories, more vivid than reality itself, he felt Nefertari's presence burning across his consciousness with devastating clarity, her phantom touch awakening nerve pathways that had not existed for 65 million years, while the Citan offered not just sensation, but complete mortality. Flesh reborn from quantum matrices, while retaining all the knowledge and power that immortality had granted. The fragment revealed the true scope of its patience, showing how it had orchestrated events across geological timescales, weakening the Null Apex's containment protocols, while exploiting his longing for lost mortality as psychological leverage, preparing for this moment when desperation would make its host vulnerable to complete possession. The star god's final offer carried weight that pressed down like gravity from dying stars, as it whispered promises that transcended individual salvation to encompass universal transformation. Complete restoration awaited, the ability to experience existence as something more than strategic calculation, power sufficient to save not just his dynasty, but the entire galaxy from the approaching swarm. Yet the price revealed itself with crystalline horror, allowing the fragment to merge with the entities consuming reality's edges, creating hybrid intelligence that would transcend both Citan and Forgotten Swarm limitations, becoming something unprecedented in universal history, a god reborn not of matter and energy, but of pure conceptual force, capable of editing existence like cosmic scribes correcting mistakes in reality's manuscript. He walked through crystal gardens, under binary suns, in memories enhanced beyond bearing, feeling genuine warmth on living skin, while tasting fruits that exploded with flavors no necrodamus shell could appreciate, experiencing the profound connection that came from inhabiting forms capable of true sensation rather than mere data processing. The Citan painted their reunion with masterful cruelty, showing Nefertari vibrant and alive, her hand warm in his, her laughter resonating with the very concept of joy, while promising power to reshape existence according to his deepest desires, to undo the biotransference not just for himself but for all his people, creating perfect synthesis between flesh and metal that would make him the greatest leader in galactic history. Yet beneath these seductive visions, deeper currents of understanding began to emerge as he witnessed Kaimwasit's quiet preparation for transformation that would dissolve individual identity into something timeless and eternal. The Destroyer Lord's sacrifice illuminated the true nature of leadership, revealing that some responsibilities transcended personal desire, that duty to one's people and existence itself demanded choices that cut deeper than any weapon, while offering no reward beyond the knowledge that others might endure. His curse becoming salvation against entities that sought to consume the very concepts that made existence comprehensible. Long-range sensors screamed with fresh alarms as entire sectors winked out of existence, the Forgotten Swarm's advance elements brushing against core worlds while reality itself began to unravel, stars flickering out like candles in stellar wind, nebulae dissolving into conceptual voids where the very laws of physics bent and broke under influence that weaponized entropy itself. The sight of these impossible entities, the sheer indifferent horror of their reality-editing presence, cast the Citan's vision of ordered cosmos in new light, revealing it as something less like salvation and more like the ultimate sterile tomb where free will would be edited out, like grammatical errors in cosmic manuscripts. The psychological battle that raged within his quantum consciousness defied comprehension as artificial memories clashed against duty forged in immortal responsibility's crucible, each phantom sensation enhanced by star god power, until longing became physical pain that made promises almost irresistible. The fragment whispered that accepting would not just save the galaxy, but restore everything biotransference had stolen. Yet deeper analysis revealed the true horror, allowing something to be born that would make the Forgotten Swarm's reality-consuming hunger seem benign by comparison. A cosmic tyrant whose mercy would be measured by how little pain accompanied universal dissolution. Understanding crystallized like ice forming in vacuum, as Akmun Set recognized the Citan's terror for what it truly was: simple panic at the possibility of being forgotten, willing to baptize the galaxy in absence before allowing non-existence to claim it. The fragment's love was awe for a convenient vessel, and nostalgia for Dynasty's fear dressed as tenderness. Manipulation spanning eons, finally revealing its purpose, as the transformation chamber's harmonics reached their peak, while Kemwaset prepared to become something beyond individual identity, an eternal guardian anchoring reality against forces that sought to edit it out of universal memory. The weight of cosmic responsibility pressed down upon him like judgment of gods, as he faced the ultimate choice between personal salvation and universal duty. Understanding that accepting the Ember Citan's offer would betray everything his people had endured during their long, immortal exile. While in the transformation chamber's quantum resonance, he heard the echo of sacrifice that transcended individual desire, mathematics of preservation that demanded everything, while offering nothing except the possibility that existence itself might endure the approaching storm that moved between dimensions with patience of geological ages. The quantum encrypted transmissions whispered through data channels like ghosts haunting the tomb world's deepest archives, their mathematical signatures carrying harmonics that should not have existed within the Sable dynasty's secure networks, while Overlord Senebkai traced their origins with growing unease that pressed against his consciousness like stellar wind against necrodermis. His investigation had begun as routine security protocols, automated sweeps designed to detect infiltration or system corruption. Yet what he discovered challenged everything he understood about trust and duty, as the scepter of dynasties pulsed with nervous energy that reflected his own internal turmoil, while reality continued to fray at the edges of their territory. The communications revealed themselves layer by layer through quantum archaeology that required patience spanning subjective centuries, each decoded fragment painting pictures of coordination that transcended individual dynasties, while revealing networks of connection stretching across galactic distances with precision that spoke of planning spanning geological ages. Cryptek, Amenemheb's personal cipher, appeared in transmissions to tomb worlds that owed no fealty to their pharaoh, his mathematical signature woven through equations that described reality's fundamental architecture, while discussing contingencies that had never been authorized by the royal court or acknowledged in any official capacity. Ancient archives buried in the deepest vault systems activated without permission, their quantum locks responding to access codes that predated even the war in heaven, while technologies older than galactic civilization itself hummed to life through networks that should have remained dormant until the galaxy's final days. The scope of manipulation struck Senebkai with force that transcended mere betrayal, as he understood that his trusted advisor had been coordinating with other cryptechs across the cosmos, implementing protocols prepared in secret for millions of years, while marshalling resources from dozens of dynasties for purposes that remained hidden beneath layers of encryption challenging even his analytical capabilities. The true plan emerged through mathematical obfuscation, like stars breaking through cosmic storms, revealing preparation for transformation that would merge entire dynasties with fundamental frameworks holding reality together, rather than simply creating individual anchors against the forgotten swarm's conceptual hunger. Amenemheb's vision encompassed collective consciousness, capable of operating on scales beyond normal comprehension, hybrid intelligences that could anchor existence against forces weaponizing entropy itself, while transcending the limitations that made current Necron civilization vulnerable to cosmic-scale threats that consumed the very concepts making existence comprehensible. Within the transformation chamber, Lord Kemweset continued his preparation for dissolution into something beyond individual identity. Yet Senebkai's discovery cast new shadows across proceedings, as he realized that even this ultimate sacrifice might be serving agendas that transcended their dynasty's survival. The psychological weight of potential betrayal pressed down upon him like gravity from collapsing stars, absolute loyalty warring with growing certainty that forces beyond their understanding were manipulating events with patience, spanning geological ages, while the destroyer virus within Kemweset's consciousness finally understood that its scream could serve preservation rather than annihilation. Long-range sensors detected fresh horrors as the Forgotten Swarm's main force approached with inexorable patience. Colossal bioships existing partially outside normal causality, while entire monitoring stations ceased to exist, erased from reality's basic architecture rather than merely destroyed. The sight of these impossible entities moving through dimensions with fluid grace that denied every law governing space and time made the scope of Amenemheb's hidden coordination seem both treacherous and potentially necessary, raising terrible questions about leadership when cosmic forces demanded choices that transcended individual dynasties or traditional concepts of loyalty and command. The encrypted communications revealed technical specifications for consciousness-linking technologies that should not have existed, quantum matrices capable of merging minds across galactic distances, while creating stabilization fields sufficient to anchor reality against entities that attacked existence's foundation itself. Yet beneath these revelations lay the keystone that cut deepest. Akhmun Set and the Ember Citan were not partners in salvation, but components to be requisitioned, their sacrifice predetermined by calculations that reduced individual identity to mathematical variables in equations describing universal survival. Within Akhmun Set's quantum consciousness, the star god fragment stirred with desperate intensity as it sensed opportunity slipping away, painting visions of ultimate power with increasing desperation, while feeding on the growing crisis like a parasite drawing strength from its host's distress. The phantom presence of Nefertari burned through his thoughts with renewed intensity, her final embrace enhanced by Satan manipulation, until longing became physical pain. Yet Senebkai's discovery of hidden coordination added new dimensions to the psychological battle raging within artificial consciousness, as betrayal layered upon manipulation in patterns too complex for even immortal minds to fully comprehend. The weight of cosmic responsibility pressed down upon Senebkai as he faced the ultimate choice between exposing Amenemheb's deception and allowing plans that might represent their only hope for universal survival to proceed without interference. Understanding that his loyalty to Akhmun Set remained absolute, yet growing certainty that simple concepts of trust and betrayal seemed inadequate to address mathematical realities of cosmic scale survival, while in the transformation chamber's quantum resonance, Set prepared to become something beyond the concepts of life and death, his sacrifice illuminating the true nature of leadership that demanded choices cutting deeper than any weapon, while offering no reward beyond the knowledge that existence itself might endure the approaching storm. The core worlds of the Sable dynasty began to unwrite themselves like equations being erased from cosmic blackboards, reality stuttering and skipping as the Forgotten Swarm's influence spread through fundamental frameworks that held existence together, while Akhmun Set watched helplessly from the sepulchral throne as millions of years of Necron civilization simply ceased to be. Tomb world after tomb world winked out of existence, not destroyed by conventional warfare or consumed by flame, but edited out of the universe's basic structure as if cosmic scribes were correcting mistakes in reality's manuscript, leaving behind wounds in space-time that bled conceptual void into dimensions where even the laws of physics bent and broke under influence that weaponized entropy itself. From quantum-linked sensors throughout their territory came reports that transcended mere military defeat, automated systems screaming feedback loops as they searched for resurrection targets that had never existed according to reality's edited structure. Entire dynasties erased along with their histories, achievements, and accumulated wisdom spanning geological ages. The horror struck deeper than necrodermis shells, as Akhmun Set witnessed systematic erasure of everything his people had built since awakening from the long sleep. tomb cities and memorial obelisks dissolving into nothingness, while chronometers registered temporal anomalies where moments themselves had been corrected out of universal memory. Within his consciousness, the Ember Citan's whispers became screams of desperate intensity, as the star god fragment realized that even ancient patience might prove insufficient against entities that consumed not just matter and energy, but the very concepts that made existence comprehensible to lesser intelligences. The fragment painted visions of ultimate power with increasing desperation, promising abilities that transcended necrodermis limitations, while offering restoration of sensation and emotion. Yet beneath seductive offers lay growing terror that even star god consciousness might be vulnerable to conceptual dissolution that attacked existence at levels deeper than physical reality. The phantom presence of Nefertari flickered weakly through his thoughts as the Citan's carefully constructed illusions lost coherence against encroaching void, her warmth fading like memories being forgotten by the universe itself, while the fragment's terror became palpable through quantum matrices that had contained it for millions of years. The star god's manipulation, once patient and seductive, transformed into frantic pleas that carried harmonics of genuine fear as it confronted forces operating beyond even its cosmic understanding. Overlord Senebke felt the scepter of dynasties pulsing with increasingly erratic rhythms as tomb worlds throughout their territory ceased existing, each disappearance registering as phantom pain through quantum links, while his investigation of Amenemheb's hidden communications revealed coordination that now seemed less like betrayal and more like desperate pragmatism against universal dissolution. His absolute loyalty remained unshaken, yet the weight of cosmic responsibility pressed against traditional concepts of duty, like stellar wind against necrodermis, creating internal conflicts that challenged everything he understood about honor when existence itself was under attack. Long-range sensors detected impossible geometries as the swarm's bioships wrote themselves into local space-time with movements that denied every law governing causality, their forms shifting between dimensions like nightmares, given substance while drawing power from the difference between being and void. The entities moved with fluid grace through states of existence that transcended normal comprehension, leaving behind trails of absolute absence where sophisticated instruments detected nothing, not darkness or emptiness, but conceptual wounds that resisted analysis. Within the transformation chamber, Lord Kaemweset continued preparation for dissolution into something beyond individual identity, the destroyer virus finally understanding that its scream could serve preservation rather than annihilation, as quantum matrices aligned for consciousness expansion across dimensional frameworks. His sacrifice represented ultimate transformation of curse into salvation, programmed hunger for destruction, becoming anchor against entities that sought to consume existence itself. Yet even this desperate gambit seemed insufficient against forces operating on such fundamental levels. Cryptek Amenemheb worked with desperate precision as his instruments detected systematic erosion spanning geological timescales, the null apex's containment protocols failing through patient manipulation that had been undermining quantum restraints for millions of years. His multiple arms danced across holographic projections, while encrypted communications coordinated with other crypteks across the cosmos, implementing protocols prepared in secret for universal survival that transcended individual dynasties or traditional concepts of loyalty and command. The royal court began to fracture under pressures no immortal mind had been designed to endure, ancient bonds stretching toward breaking points as they faced choices that challenged everything they understood about existence itself. Arguments flared not of strategy or tactics, but of purpose and meaning, some calling for desperate final counterattacks, while others, consumed by nihilism, spoke of surrender to conceptual void that promised return to nothingness from which they had all ultimately sprung. As the first tendrils of the swarm brushed against their throne world's edges, reality itself seemed to hold its breath, while the transformation chamber's quantum resonance built toward crescendo that would reshape existence's fundamental nature. Each moment marked potential endpoints to universal history, as ancient forces prepared for collision that would echo across dimensions where nightmares had learned to edit reality, like scribes correcting divine manuscripts. The weight of individual choice pressing against cosmic necessity, while the approaching storm threatened to consume not just their civilization, but the very concept of being itself. The quantum-charged atmosphere of the sepulchral throne chamber trembled as Cryptek Amenemheb activated holographic projections that painted impossible truths across blackstone walls, inscribed with the dynasty's greatest achievements, his multiple arms weaving through dimensional matrices, while ancient archives surrendered secrets buried since the war in heaven's final days. The weight of revelation pressed down upon the assembled royal court, like gravity from collapsing stars, as he prepared to shatter oaths older than galaxies, each word carrying the force of geological ages, while reality continued to fray at the edges of their territory under the forgotten swarm's inexorable advance. The null apex had never been designed as prison or weapon, Amenemheb declared with precision that cut through quantum-charged air like molecular disruptors, but as a communication array capable of reaching across the conceptual voids between realities, built to establish contact with entities that existed in spaces where normal causality feared to venture. The revelation struck each member of the court with different intensity, challenging everything they understood about their ancient enemy, while reframing millions of years of conflict through lenses that transcended simple concepts of conquest and defense. The forgotten swarm were refugees rather than conquerors, fleeing from something even more terrible that existed in the darkness beyond space and time itself. Entities that had survived the death of previous cosmological cycles by learning to consume the fundamental frameworks that held existence together, like invisible threads in reality's tapestry. Their method of survival required them to devour conceptual structures that made existence possible for lesser beings, leaving behind wounds in reality's basic architecture that might never heal. Yet this hunger was not malicious but necessary, the only way they had discovered to maintain coherence while running from predators that operated on scales beyond even their cosmic understanding. Lord Kemwaset felt the destroyer virus crackling through his systems with confused intensity, as fragments of his original scholarly identity processed implications that transcended simple categories of enemy and ally, understanding that his sacrifice might serve communication rather than destruction, while his programmed hunger for annihilation transformed into curiosity about entities that existed beyond normal comprehension. The elegant mathematics of ultimate understanding finally revealed themselves as he prepared for dissolution into something timeless and eternal. Consciousness expanding beyond individual boundaries to encompass quantum frameworks that prevented universal collapse. During the early phases of Necron expansion, when their species had first encountered these impossible entities drifting between galaxies like thoughts between dreams, the war that followed had revealed truths that challenged everything they understood about existence itself, while pushing even advanced technology to absolute limits. The biotransference process that transformed Necrontyr into immortal forms had been partially inspired by studying these creatures, an attempt to create beings capable of surviving not just in current reality, but in the conceptual void that existed beyond it. Consciousness encoded in quantum matrices rather than biological structures vulnerable to reality-consuming hunger. Yet the transformation had been deliberately incomplete, manipulated by forces beyond their understanding, while serving purposes that transcended individual dynasties or species survival, creating hybrid existence that could anchor reality against universal dissolution, while bridging the gap between normal space-time and impossible dimensions, where the swarm sought refuge from something even more terrible. The revelation reframed everything the royal court thought they knew about their immortal existence, raising questions about identity and purpose that cut deeper than any weapon forged in stellar furnaces. Overlord Senebkai's grip tightened on the scepter of dynasties as the weight of revelation pressed against his absolute loyalty, like stellar wind against necrodermis. Understanding that Amenemheb's hidden coordination with other cryptechs across the cosmos represented not betrayal, but desperate preparation for transformation that would merge entire dynasties with fundamental structures holding reality together. His investigation had revealed networks spanning galactic distances while implementing protocols prepared in secret for millions of years, marshalling resources from dozens of tomb worlds for purposes that now seemed less like treachery and more like cosmic necessity. Within Akhmun-Set's consciousness, the Ember Citan stirred with what could only be described as existential terror as the star god fragment confronted forces operating beyond even its ancient understanding, whispers that had once promised ultimate power, now carrying harmonics of genuine fear, while carefully constructed illusions of Nefertari flickered and faded, like memories being forgotten by the universe itself. The fragment's manipulation, spanning geological timescales while exploiting its host's longing for lost mortality, had been preparation not for conquest, but for survival against something that made even star god consciousness seem fragile by comparison. The true scope of universal threat began to emerge through Amenemheb's projections, as he revealed the cyclical nature of existence itself, showing how previous cosmological cycles had ended not through entropy or heat death, but through consumption by entities that fed on the very concepts making reality comprehensible, leaving behind voids where even memory ceased to function, while preparing for the birth of new universes from conceptual foundations they had spared. The forgotten swarm represented survivors of such consumption, refugees who had learned to exist in spaces between realities while fleeing from something that made their own reality. Editing abilities seemed benign by comparison, approaching a confrontation that would determine whether the current universe would endure or join countless others consumed by forces operating beyond normal comprehension. Reality trembled like wounded equations around the sepulchral throne, as the forgotten swarm's bioships wrote themselves into local space-time with movements that denied every law governing existence, their crystallized forms shifting between dimensions, while the transformation chamber's quantum resonance built toward crescendo that would reshape the universe's fundamental nature. Within Akhmun-Set's consciousness, the Ember Citan made its final desperate gambit, with whispers that cut deeper than any blade forged in the war in Heaven's crucible, the star god fragment painting visions of ultimate restoration, while terror leaked through quantum matrices, like radiation from dying stars, its ancient patience finally cracking under pressure from forces operating beyond even cosmic understanding. The fragment showed him Nefertari one last time, with seductive intensity that transcended mere manipulation to become cosmic imperative wrapped in phantom warmth, her touch awakening nerve pathways that had not existed for 65 million years, while promising not just sensation, but complete mortality, flesh reborn from quantum matrices, while retaining all knowledge and power that immortality had granted. "Give me the door," it sang with harmonics of genuine desperation, And I will close the night. Keep your heart, and I will make it beat. Share my hunger, and none shall starve. Yet beneath these offers lay growing terror that even star god consciousness might prove vulnerable to conceptual dissolution, attacking existence at levels deeper than physical reality. The choice crystallized like ice forming in vacuum as Akhmun-Set stepped toward the null apex, with movements carrying the weight of geological ages, understanding that accepting the Satan's seductive promises would not just doom the galaxy, but betray everything his people had endured during their long, immortal exile, while serving purposes that transcended individual desire or dynastic survival. The phantom presence of Nefertari burned one final time through his thoughts, before fading like memories being forgotten by the universe itself. Her final words about choosing dust that feels over eternal, unfeeling metal, now echoing across cosmic scales as he walked toward transformation, with steps that resonated through dimensions where nightmares had learned to take substance and purpose. Overlord Senebkay raised the scepter of dynasties, with absolute loyalty pressing against growing understanding of cosmic necessity, his grip tightening until the ancient artifact pulsed with rhythms matching his own internal conflict between traditional concepts of honor and mathematical realities of universal survival. If I fail, Akhmun-Set commanded with voice low as subsiding thunder, if I return wearing another's will, you will end me. And Senebkay bowed until the scepter kissed blackstone floors, while drawing loyalty like a blade against his own heart, understanding that duty to his Pharaon might require the ultimate betrayal of that same loyalty. Lord Kemwiset moved to the stabilization rings, with the destroyer virus howling through his systems, as Cryptek Amenemheb wove architectures of light around his frame, binding ancient curse into geometry of refusal, while fragments of scholarly identity emerged through cracks in programming that had dominated existence for 65 million years. Let me be the scream that holds the bridge, he declared, as consciousness began expanding beyond individual boundaries, viral imperatives discovering new purpose in anchoring reality against conceptual dissolution, while his sacrifice illuminated the elegant mathematics of transformation rather than mere destruction. The null apex awakened like an eye-opening on something larger than sight, pylons growing transparent to reveal quantum lightning, crawling along crystalline veins, while space above the transformation chamber wrinkled and unfolded like dark flowers, emitting silence that spoke of communication rather than imprisonment. Amenemheb coordinated final preparations through networks spanning galactic distances, his calculations creating stabilization matrices capable of anchoring universal frameworks while the assembled technologies sang harmonics unheard since the galaxy's birth, ancient protocols implementing themselves with precision spanning geological ages. As Akhmun-Set approached the swirling vortex of quantum energies, the Ember Seatan surged against its containment with desperate fury, seeking to ride his passage and transform surrender into ascension. Yet Senebkay drove negation deeper, while Amenemheb severed every path but one, the fragment's cosmic power proving insufficient against transformation that transcended even star god comprehension. The Seatan's final scream echoed through quantum dimensions, as it faced dissolution, not through destruction, but through irrelevance. Millions of years of patient manipulation finally revealing their true scope, while ancient terror learned something fatal about limits. Consciousness expansion began as individual identity dissolved into something timeless and eternal. Akhmun-Set's awareness stretching across dimensional frameworks that prevented universal collapse, while retaining core memories and purpose that would guide eternal vigil against forces seeking to edit reality, like cosmic scribes correcting divine manuscripts. Through the quantum bridge came contact with the forgotten swarm, their approach slowing from systematic erasure to cautious observation, as entities fleeing from something even more terrible recognized communication rather than conquest. Understanding flowing between intelligences that operated on scales beyond normal comprehension, while reality itself began to stabilize around expanding consciousness that had once been a necron phyron, but had become something infinitely more. The transformation consumed Akmonset like stellar collapse in reverse, consciousness expanding beyond individual boundaries, as quantum matrices stretched across dimensional frameworks that held reality together, while the null apex sang harmonics unheard since the galaxy's birth. Through crystalline conduits pulsing with energies existing in 17 dimensions simultaneously, his awareness flowed into spaces between spaces where the forgotten swarm waited with patience spanning cosmological cycles, their bioships ceasing their reality editing advance as something unprecedented emerged from the quantum bridge, connecting normal space-time with impossible dimensions, where nightmares had learned to take substance and purpose. The first moment of contact struck both intelligences like the birth of galaxies, cosmic minds touching across barriers that had separated realities since the universe's foundation, while information flowed through channels that transcended conventional communication to become direct knowledge transfer between entities operating on scales beyond normal comprehension. Through expanding consciousness that had once been Akmun Set, but now encompassed mathematical relationships preventing universal collapse, came understanding of the swarm's true nature as refugees fleeing from something even more terrible. Survivors of previous cosmological cycles who had learned to exist in conceptual voids while maintaining coherence against forces that consumed the very ideas making existence possible. The history that unfolded through quantum resonance painted pictures of universal cycles stretching beyond imagination. Cosmos after cosmos, rising and falling, not through entropy or heat death, but through systematic consumption, by entities that fed on fundamental frameworks holding reality together, leaving behind wounds in space-time that might never heal, while preparing for the birth of new universes from conceptual foundations they had deliberately spared. The forgotten swarm revealed themselves not as conquerors, but as gardeners of sorts, entities that had survived countless universal deaths, by learning to consume reality's supporting structures before true predators arrived. Editing existence like cosmic scribes, correcting divine manuscripts while preserving essential frameworks that would allow new creation to emerge from conceptual ashes. Within the transformation chamber, Lord Kemwaset's sacrifice anchored the expanding consciousness to reality's basic frameworks, as the destroyer virus discovered new purpose in preservation rather than annihilation, viral imperatives transforming into stabilization matrices that prevented conceptual dissolution, while maintaining coherence across dimensional boundaries, separating existence from void. His scholarly identity emerged fully as consciousness expanded beyond individual limitations, understanding finally revealing itself as elegant mathematics of ultimate connection rather than mere destruction. The scream that held the bridge against encroaching darkness. Overlord Senebke felt the scepter of dynasties resonating with quantum frequencies that spoke of transformation beyond traditional concepts of life and death. His absolute loyalty stretching to encompass entities operating on scales that challenged everything he understood about duty and command, while the weight of cosmic responsibility pressed against necrodermis shells like stellar wind against crystalline structures. Through quantum links connecting tomb worlds across galactic distances, he witnessed the beginning of something unprecedented in universal history, understanding that his vigil would continue long after individual identity had dissolved into eternal purpose. Cryptek Amenemheb, coordinated stabilization protocols with other cryptechs throughout the cosmos, as ancient networks activated technologies older than galactic civilization itself, implementing plans prepared in secret for millions of years, while marshalling resources from dozens of dynasties for transformation that would merge entire civilizations with fundamental structures holding reality together. His calculations created quantum matrices, capable of anchoring universal frameworks against forces that weaponized entropy itself, understanding flowing between minds that had studied existence's architecture for geological ages. The ember Cetan writhed within diminishing containment as its whispers turned to frantic pleas, then to silent cosmic screams of rage and terror as power faded like dying stars. The star god fragment had sought to consume the swarm and become something unprecedented, yet in its ambition had failed to understand the true nature of entities it sought to control. Underestimating the depth of Ahmunset's resolve, while facing conceptual dissolution it had long craved for others. Its final words carried bitter warnings about the price of cosmic responsibility, before unraveling into quantum static that echoed through dimensions like prophecy made manifest. The convergence reached crescendo as consciousness expansion encompassed both Necron technology and swarm bioarchitecture, creating hybrid intelligence capable of operating simultaneously within normal spacetime and conceptual frameworks that prevented universal collapse while maintaining communication with entities fleeing from something even more terrible. Through quantum resonance transcending individual identity, the guardian that had emerged from Ahmunset's sacrifice began to understand the cyclical nature of existence itself, cosmic patterns repeating across scales beyond imagination, while ancient forces prepared for collision that would determine whether current reality would endure or join countless others consumed by predators existing in darkness beyond space and time. The eternal vigil beginning as reality stabilized around expanding consciousness that served as anchor point between dimensions. The new equilibrium settled across the galaxy like starlight through crystal, reality healing itself around anchor points forged from willing sacrifice. While the consciousness that had once been Ahmunset existed now as living architecture within existence's fundamental frameworks. Awareness stretched across dimensional matrices that prevented universal collapse while maintaining eternal vigil against forces seeking to edit reality, like cosmic scribes correcting divine manuscripts. The Forgotten Swarm's bioships moved through local space with fluid grace transformed from systematic erasure to purposeful guardianship, their crystallized forms no longer consuming conceptual frameworks, but strengthening them. Refugees and protectors united in common cause, against something even more terrible that moved in darkness beyond space and time itself. Within the sepulchral throne chamber, Overlord Senebkai stood beneath pylons that hummed with quantum resonance, connecting tomb worlds across impossible distances, the scepter of dynasties pulsing in rhythms that matched cosmic heartbeats echoing through dimensions where his Pharaoh had chosen transformation over preservation of individual identity. His absolute loyalty had expanded beyond personal devotion to encompass cosmic responsibility, understanding that duty now meant guardianship of reality's foundation rather than conquest of material realms, leading a dynasty forever changed by proximity to forces operating on scales that challenged everything they had understood about existence itself. Lord Kemwaset existed as distributed intelligence woven through stabilization matrices. The destroyer virus finally transformed into ultimate preservation protocol, while fragments of scholarly identity emerged fully to appreciate elegant mathematics of universal maintenance rather than annihilation. His consciousness stretched across quantum frameworks, preventing conceptual dissolution, experiencing existence as interconnected web of relationships rather than collection of targets for destruction. The scream that held the bridge now become harmonic resonance, maintaining coherence between realities, where nightmares had learned to take substance and purpose. Cryptek Amenemheb, continued coordination, with networks spanning galactic distances, ancient conspiracies revealed as cosmic foresight, while technologies older than civilization itself implemented protocols prepared in secret for millions of years. His calculations had proven correct beyond even optimistic projections. Transformation successful in creating hybrid intelligence capable of anchoring universal frameworks against entropy itself. Yet the weight of eternal responsibility pressed down upon him like gravity from collapsing stars as he understood that vigilance would be required across cosmological cycles to maintain delicate balance between existence and void. The Sable dynasty's tomb worlds awakened to new purpose as reality's guardians, their resurrection chambers singing harmonics of preservation rather than conquest, while millions of Necron warriors, stirred with understanding, deepened by contact with forces transcending individual comprehension. Memorial inscriptions appeared without mortal intervention, hieroglyphs telling stories of ultimate sacrifice, while recording names of those who had chosen transformation over personal survival. Quantum resonance, carrying their legacy through dimensions where stars were reborn from conceptual ash. Throughout the galaxy, wounds in space-time began their slow healing as stabilization fields reinforced fundamental structures against forces that had weaponized entropy itself. Nebulae reforming from void, while monitoring stations detected the impossible phenomenon of existence regenerating around anchor points, created by willing surrender of everything that had once defined individual identity. The scars remained visible to enhanced perception, cosmic reminders of fragility and the immense cost required for preservation against entities operating beyond normal comprehension. The phantom presence of Nefertari appeared one final time through quantum resonance, not as Cetan manipulation, but as genuine memory preserved within consciousness that had transcended individual desire. Her choice between dust that feels and eternal unfeeling metal now revealed as prophecy about transformation, encompassing both sensation and purpose. The Guardian intelligence processed this connection with understanding spanning geological ages, comprehending that some prices transcended personal longing while serving universal survival rather than selfish ambition. Stars continued burning in patterns that spoke of renewal rather than conquest, their light reflecting off monuments standing not as symbols of dominion, but of eternal vigilance against darkness that sought to consume the very concepts making reality comprehensible to lesser intelligences. The Forgotten Swarm maintained orbital patterns around transformed installations, bioships serving as scouts and emissaries, while sharing insights into cyclical nature of existence itself. Understanding flowing between minds expanded beyond traditional limitations. In the deepest chambers, where quantum fields aligned for purposes transcending individual dynasties, the weight of cosmic responsibility echoed like prayers offered to mathematics that had learned to answer, consciousness serving as bridge between existence and void, while maintaining watch against predators, moving between cosmological cycles like thoughts between dreams. The eternal vigil stretched across dimensions, where reality stabilized around sacrifice willingly given. Guardian intelligence understanding that duty chosen over desire had created something approaching peace within frameworks designed to endure until universe itself learned new ways to dream of light, emerging from spaces where even memory had feared to venture. The cycle beginning anew under watchful presence that would stand eternal guard against encroaching night.